Decap Attack. Oh god, Decap Attack. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Vic Tokai. They didn't make too many well-known games, but they have, in their 11-year run as a developer, made a decent number of games, their most well-known title arguably being Clash of Demon Head for NES. But Decap Attack may as well be far more infamous. Decap Attack is a platformer released exclusively for Genesis in 1991 to, let's say, mixed reception. Now, at the time, critics praised the game's graphics, but ultimately said that the gameplay itself was generic, nothing too special. And about that graphics part, it's been known for some time now that Decap Attack is a reskin of a Japanese game. And I am going to try to pronounce this name. Here we go. Magical Hat no Butobi Tabo Daiboken, or roughly, Magical Hat's Turbo Flight Adventure. English not good, a licensed anime game. At some point, somebody decided, why don't we bring this to America? And promptly reskinned the graphics to give it a horror feel, changed the soundtrack, and called it a day. Now, generally, I'd immediately say that this is an absolute tragedy of a game, much like anime games of the time, but I'd be wrong in saying that. More on that later, but for now, the story. Weird as it is. You are Chuck D. Head, a hodgepodge of flesh and bone created by Dr. Frank N. Stein and his assistant Igor. You were supposed to have a head, but that didn't end up quite right. Now, your unnatural existence didn't come about without purpose. You see, there's this guy named Max Decap, and he wants to take over the world. And he, his underworld army, and some of the good doctor's creations are out to do just that. And how do they start? Well, by splitting up this here island into 7 pieces in order to take control of each one. Your job is deceptively simple. Use your head, or both of them, to regain control of the 7 regions. But you're not alone in this battle. The Doctor and Igor back you up with a supply of potions you collect throughout the levels, as well as 1 special item for each round. Your ultimate goal is to bring the fight straight to Max himself, but that won't be easy. Why? Because this is legitimately one of the hardest games on the Sega Genesis. It may be short with only 21 total stages, but very few of those 21 stages are actually easy. But, you know, I've been putting it off for long enough. What is the actual game like? As said before, Decap Attack is a platform game. You run, jump, hover, and punch enemies in 7 different sections. Every section is split into 3 levels, at the end of which you fight a boss, save for the second, which doesn't have one for some reason. You can use potions to give yourself an edge on your enemies, but these must be collected in the stages first. These usually consist of your average video game power-ups. Xenon kills all enemies on screen. Swill, which gives you 10 seconds of invincibility. Troixy, I think I pronounced that correctly, or Troiki. I don't know. A ball of light to use as a weapon. Freeze, which freezes all enemies on screen for 10 seconds. I'm just gonna call it Klaxy, which makes you run faster and jump higher. And Ooze O2, which makes you punch further and faster. Beyond that, you can collect coins to use in a bonus level, the occasional extra life, and a health expansion, very rare, and those aforementioned special items. There's one for every section you visit. However, they can only be found in the final levels of those sections, and you can't finish the stage without collecting them. Luckily, if you happen to miss one, you can go back through the stage to find it, and you don't have to fight the boss again if you do. This is the usual game design for this type of game in this period in time, But there are a great many things that differentiate Decap Attack from the rest of the genre, just not in gameplay. For one thing, the visuals are phenomenal. Every section is unique in its own way. Generally, they tend to feature the same obstacles and enemies, but the levels tend to be sprawling and packed with difficulty. And of course, where would the visuals be without the audio? And while the sound effects may be a tad simple, you also have the music, and man, the music! This has got to be one of the best soundtracks on the Sega Genesis. It echoes the game's themes and gives us some pretty rockin' tunes at the same time. Now, where this game tends to fall flat for me is in the difficulty department. Mostly because the difficulty is based on untelegraphed and unavoidable damage. Yeah. The idea of difficulty here isn't really based on skill, but memorization. You are certainly able to beat a level on your first go, sure, but you won't get by unscathed. What doesn't help is that health items don't tend to pop up that often. To get items, of course, you have to punch these stones. Some give you potions, some give you health, some give you coins, a few give you lives. At least one has the health expansion, but they're not all good. Some have absolutely nothing. Okay? And some house enemies. Now that's a load of shit. You hit a stone expecting to get an item, and the next thing you know, you've taken untelegraphed damage. Like I said, the game demands you memorize its levels. It's the only way you'll get through without dying too much. Then there are the bosses. The 6 bosses are all kind of annoying. They're not hard per se, but do require some amount of memorization. Their patterns are fixed, but that doesn't make it any easier. I had no real trouble with the first, and as stated, Section 2 doesn't have one. I don't know why. The second boss was fairly easy as well. The third wasn't bad either. They all had simple patterns and could be beaten fairly quickly. Then comes Section 5. This is where the difficulty really ramped up. I had a tough time with this boss. Again, it's a fixed pattern, but for whatever reason, I just wasn't really getting it. Didn't help that I only had 1 health to work with. Did eventually get it though. Next wasn't terrible again. Just follow the pattern. It was the final boss that gave me the most trouble. Max Decap jumps around, causing a few rocks to fall, but that's not all. Every now and again, he'll split into 2 and shoot fireballs. This is essentially this boss's wild card. It's the one thing that isn't fixed, since it follows you around. I was dying here a lot, but then came to a realization. The only part of his sprite that can damage you is his head, meaning you can pass in front of him, avoiding damage. I don't know how I managed to miss this, but I did. And suddenly, with this in mind, I changed my strategy, and within a few attempts, I finally beat the game. So, this was a fairly hard game. It took me a while to beat. What happens now? Well, with all the pieces back where they were before, and Max Decap defeated, Chuck walks back home and collapses on the doorstep. Dr. Frank and Igor drag him back inside to fix him up. At this point, the good doctor feels it's appropriate to reward his creation for beating the odds. And what does he give him? The one thing he still lacks. A proper head. And for whatever reason, this turns him into a human. The credits roll, and with that, the game is properly over, and boots you back to the title screen. So, now that it's all said and done, is Decap Attack a good game or not? Well, I'd say so, yeah, it's just a bit unfair and hard. And like I said, it's a game based on memorization and whether or not you actually have the patience to get through the levels. However, I should note that you don't actually need the physical cartridge like I do, because Sega just keeps putting this game in collections with the rest of their Genesis titles. It's pretty much always been readily available on modern platforms, and with other features like save states, rewind, stuff that make it a bit less tedious. But yeah, if you're looking for a bit of a harder experience, can't go wrong with this. But then again, there are still far better games. But there are also far worse. We'll get to some of them.